Whether it was sports personalities viewers could relate to, the iconic This Is Sportscenter commercials, or shows that were not only entertaining, but also featured real journalists delivering honest and thoughtful perspectives. ESPN used to be the gold standard, but sadly today, fans have to watch hours of so-called journalists yelling over each other, to anchors obsessed with only the biggest names and teams, and the constant injection of politics and countless other distractions. As cable TV continues to decline year after year, ESPN is doing everything in its power to stay relevant. As a result, they have abandoned the very things that made their network great in the first place, in exchange for viral clicks, and more than anything, their greed for money. This is the incredible rise and slow, painful, yet satisfying downfall of ESPN. In today's day and age, fans can get score updates via countless apps. More content within those apps, tune in to dedicated sports channels like ESPN, FS1, and NFL Network, watch independent creators on YouTube, listen to thousands of sports podcasts, and have access to all of their favorite games and highlights at their fingertips. To be honest, it's quite a challenge to avoid sports altogether. However, the stark contrast between now and the days before ESPN was created will make you instantly grateful for all of the options you have today. Before the creation of ESPN, sports coverage on television used to be hard to come by. Fans would either have to wait for historic events such as the Super Bowl, NBA Finals, or even the Olympics to watch fully broadcasted games. Or to find out whether your favorite team had won, you would need to sit through hours of unrelated news coverage just to see the scores. Or the most reliable and common way was to check your daily newspaper the next morning. Also, as a way to make it easier for fans to get score updates, score hotlines started popping up around the country. Fans would have to throw in $1, dial a specific number, and hear a minute-long message with the latest scores and sports news. So obviously, something as simple as checking live scores today was quite a challenge 45 years ago. But that would all change in 1979, when a man by the name of Bill Rasmussen created ESPN. After being fired from his job as a communications director for the New England Whalers in 1978, an unemployed 45-year-old Bill Rasmussen with a family to feed started brainstorming ideas.
I guess I'd always been a sports fan, so something in sports was going to happen. And wouldn't it be great if we could produce our own programming and get some coverage, maybe locally, maybe in New England.
Bill's original idea of a Connecticut-only sports channel soon progressed to the possibility of a nationwide sports channel after learning about a new communications satellite that was being launched into space that could connect back down to cable systems all over the US. So after educating himself about this new satellite, Bill Rasmussen knew he found a gold mine and had to go all in. But before he could do any of that, Bill had to get investors to help bring ESPN to life. However, at the time, the idea of a 24/7 sports channel was unheard of, and many people doubted that it would work. On top of that, Rasmussen pitched an idea of an entirely ad-supported network, meaning that the network would make all their money by selling ad spots, which is essentially the backbone of how TV shows and now content creators make money. But again, this was in the 70s, when ideas like this sounded unrealistic, as most TV networks would not only make their money from ad slots, but also charge cable providers and have their parent company pouring in millions of dollars for financial support. So the idea of a television network relying solely on ad slots was too risky for most investors, until Bill Rasmussen struck a deal with Getty Oil.
Getty Oil. They would provide the money. He started off and he said, we take 80% of your company and we'll give you all the money you want. No, make that 85. That was tough to take. If I didn't give up the control, we would have lost the idea.
So with the help of a new satellite and a whole lot of oil money, ESPN was launched on September 7th, 1979. And this is the very first segment that ever aired on ESPN.
Hi, I'm Lee Leonard welcoming you to Bristol, Connecticut, 110 miles from New York City. Why Bristol? Because here in Bristol is where all the sports action is as of right now. Now, here's another innovation on ESPN, and it's going to be a big part of our future. The Sportscenter with George Grand. He'll have the latest on what's happening all around. George?
Thanks, Lee, and welcome everyone to the ESPN Sportscenter. If it takes an interview, we'll do it. If it takes play-by-play, we'll do it. If it takes commentary, we'll do that too. That's the way we'll function from the ESPN Sportscenter.
Now, I'm still not sure just exactly how it works, but here's a man who can show us. Bill Rasmussen. board chairman of ESPN, who along with his son Scott put it all together.
The picture you're watching right now has been taken by a camera sent through some sophisticated equipment to this Earth transmitting station, which in turn feeds a satellite located 22,300 miles above the equator just south of Hawaii. The satellite receives the picture, sends it to an Earth station near your home, which in turn takes the picture over cable into your living room set. Total elapsed time, 1/5 of 1 second. Let me put that into perspective. Take any one of the next several words that I'll mention. From the beginning of the word to the end of the word, the picture will come from our camera to our transmitting station, up to the satellite, and onto your screen.
ESPN would broadcast a handful of events that day, such as college football, a slow-pitch softball game, and a professional rodeo. ESPN's first broadcast, though rough around the edges, was the beginning of a network that would change the way we watch sports forever. In its first year, ESPN's broadcast rights were limited. Therefore, the main sports that would broadcast in the beginning could go from wrestling to racquetball to minor league baseball. Because of that, the early days of ESPN had a lot more to improve on, and they wasted no time fixing them. As the new decade arrived, ESPN quickly made a name for themselves, primarily by investing in broadcasting rights to different sporting events. From acquiring the rights to televise early rounds of the NCAA basketball tournament, now known as March Madness, to the NFL draft, helping it go from this to this, and also acquiring the rights to broadcast top-ranked boxing. ESPN was laying the groundwork to become a staple of cable television. However, they had one problem. In order to dominate the sports industry, ESPN's main goal during this time was to acquire rights to broadcast major sports, such as the NBA, MLB, and the NFL. But with Getty Oil in control, ESPN had a ceiling it couldn't break through. When Getty Oil initially invested in the company, they didn't view it as a long-term deal. They knew all along that they were just trying to get a quick return. As a result, Getty Oil wouldn't provide any more funding to ESPN, leading to the network losing the broadcasting rights with the NHL and college football. But ESPN's problem would quickly be solved once the American Broadcasting Company bought 100% of ESPN. Now, with the backing of ABC and no longer a startup surviving on oil money, ESPN finally had the credibility to be taken seriously by these major sports leagues. And yes, ESPN had been running for 5 years by this point, but this is when things really began to take off. Striking broadcasting deals with the NFL to acquire Sunday Night Football, along with more games of college basketball and football, plus deals with the NHL and MLB. ESPN was dominating the sports industry, and in honor of this newfound success, they introduced a much more modern logo, the one we all know today.
Then you knew, here we go, like we're going straight up.
Alongside ESPN's growing success, their top show Sportscenter became a staple of the network, one that's still running over 30 years later. At its core, Sportscenter was originally an entertaining yet informing show that gave fans straightforward updates on all the day's sports news. ESPN's rise to become a household name was unique. See, being the go-to destination for sports fans would be enough for most cable networks. But what made ESPN stand out and so beloved was their ability to establish a group of hosts and reporters that were not only talented but had personality. These were people fans felt like they could relate to. 100% of you watching this video like sports. There's a good chance that most of you are fans of basketball, since that's my channel's main focus. You click over to any sports network, they're showing basketball, you stay and watch. The moment they play a sport you're unfamiliar with, you click off. But if you were watching ESPN, you wouldn't be going anywhere. The charisma and chemistry of the hosts made SportsCenter worth watching, no matter what sport they were covering. Their inside jokes, catchphrases, and storytelling made the news feel like entertainment. And that was ESPN's biggest advantage over every other network in the country. From Chris Berman's larger-than-life personality to the chemistry between Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann, followed by Stuart Scott's iconic catchphrases.
And the scoring race between Shaquille O'Neal and David Robinson was as tight as a ring on a fat guy's finger.
All of this helped ESPN become the #1 major cable network in America, beating out other giants in CNN and MTV. From 1980 to 1990, ESPN progressed quicker than anyone expected. Therefore, the network not only fixed the problems they had early in their existence, but also adding key elements that propelled them to become the largest cable network in the country. However, ESPN's golden era was only just getting started. As the 90s begun, ESPN would enter its golden era. So when you see comments that say how much they miss ESPN and wish it was like what it was in the 90s and early 2000s, more specifically, ESPN was like having a beer with your bro and kicking it. Now it's like being trapped in an elevator with the people who don't get invited to parties. Those people are most likely ages 45 and older, because that's how old you have to be to remember this. In 1992, ESPN would launch ESPN Sports Radio. Then 1 year later, launched ESPN2, the younger sibling of ESPN, aimed at the younger demographic, where hosts would wear casual clothing instead of a suit and tie, along with the studio itself being well less corporate looking compared to ESPN's usual setup. In 1996 came the launch of ESPN News, a non-stop sports news channel that would run 24/7. ESPN was so entertaining that kids were skipping school just to watch Sportscenter all morning. Back then, ESPN felt like a truly well-rounded network. You had live games, highlights, trusted analysis from respected reporters, and genuine entertainment from those guys as well. I mentioned some, but add in Rich Eisen, Dick Vitale, Scott Van Pelt, and John Bucciacross. These guys helped build a strong and loyal fan base. And I bet you've never heard anyone say they skipped school to watch ESPN in the last 15 years. Fans were treated with the iconic "This is SportsCenter" commercials.
All right, stay with me, Chad. Touchdown, Chad Johnson. Then you go into one of these sizzling bacon action.
Are you serious? If I did that in public, I'd find myself. Next.
Jorge.
Yeah.
What's going on with your hat, man?
What's wrong with my hat, man?
I mean, it doesn't look like a ball player's hat. I mean, it looks all brand new, you know?
Just come out of the box.
I'm a catcher, man. I never had to wear that thing.
You gotta break this thing in. Hey, Wally. Wally. Hey, it's not what you think.
Hey, George? Yeah? Borrow one of your sticky notes? Yeah. Come on in. You know, I'm just gonna write it on my hand.
Doing? Like, what do you mean?
What's going on, guys?
Josh, what's up, man?
Excuse me. What's up with him?
A couple of those home run derby balls you hit?
Yeah.
They were his cousins.
And as for shows, ESPN was loaded. From SportsCenter, NFL Primetime, Baseball Tonight, to the sports reporters. Also, ESPN launched ESPN Zone, a chain of sports-themed restaurants and entertainment centers, filled with arcade machines and of course loads of live-action sports. A pretty unique way ESPN brought fans together. In 1996, ESPN was brought by Disney as a part of its purchase of ESPN's parent company, ABC, a partnership that still exists to this day, though it's no longer as beloved by fans as it once was. So with all that I've mentioned is what made ESPN the king of sports television. The relatability, the entertainment, and the credible reporting is what made them stand out. But as the world was adapting to a new thing called the internet, ESPN had to completely rethink its strategy and business model. At the turn of the century, ESPN introduced ESPN Original Entertainment, now known as ESPN Films, a new lane for the network to roll out different forms of entertainment, from talk shows, docuseries, miniseries, and even game shows. This was ESPN's attempt to become more than a sports network, similar to how MTV were branching outside of just music videos at the time. As a result, ESPN produced a lot of content. Pardon the Interruption, Around the Horn, Cold Pizza, Jim Rohn is Burning, ESPN Hollywood, Quite Frankly with Stephen A. Smith, Playmakers, Tilt, The Bronx is Burning, Bonds on Bonds, Night School, Madden Nation, Bound for Glory, Battle of the Gridiron Stars, Street Bowl, The Life, It's the Shoes, Stump the Schwab, 2 Minute Drill. ESPN was absolutely firing out ideas during the 2000s, though most shows were cancelled in a few years or less as a result of either drifting further away from any sports relevance or just poor acting. However, they still had shows like Around the Horn, which was a debate show featuring 4 sports writers from different parts of the country arguing over the day's hottest topics. The host, who was originally Max Kellerman, would award or deduct points based on the strength of their arguments. Pardon the Interruption, another debate show which featured 2 longtime sports writers and friends, Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon. The two also debated the day's biggest sports stories, with a strict timer for each segment, keeping their discussions fast-paced and focused. And of course, the most famous of them all, Cold Pizza, where two pundits, Woody Page and someone you might recognize, Skip Bayless, led the show's main segment, First and 10, where they debated 10 of the biggest sports topics of the day, often joined by rotating guests. What, you don't recognize this show? Well, in 2007, Cold Pizza would be rebranded into First Take, the show that everybody knows by now, and has since overshadowed the entire program, for better or for worse. Which leads us to ESPN's downfall. Now, I don't have a specific date or year when ESPN was at its peak, but from what I've gathered, it seems like the 90s and early 2000s was ESPN's prime. And to the 30, 40, even 50-year-olds, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong and share your opinions in the comments. Either way, let's dive into ESPN's downfall. First Take was debuted in 2007 with Skip Bayless as the main host alongside rotating guest, and this show quickly became the most popular on the program, especially after acquiring Skip's co-host Stephen A. Smith. The two loudmouth personalities would spark heated debates, where the focus wasn't on making respectable arguments, but on delivering takes, no matter how dumb or flamboyant. Their goal was to go viral, and it worked. As a result, the take culture would become the new wave. The cheap and profitable format led to a shift in the way fans consume sports news. ESPN quickly learned that a debate show doesn't have to be good enough to keep viewers watching for 3 hours. But the goal is to generate clips that people will share like wildfire, which is pretty much the foundation of how streamers build audiences nowadays. Clip farming. But for ESPN, this was working, and in 2011, they were at their all-time high in viewership, with 100 million cable subscribers. So, riding off the high of their recent success, ESPN signed a number of long-term broadcasting deals with major sports. ESPN for $15 billion over 8 years, NBA for $24 billion over 9 years, college football for $7 billion over 12 years, and the MLB for $5.6 billion over 8 years. Signing these major deals in the early 2010s, ESPN was in the perfect position as their cable viewership was at an all-time high. But unfortunately, since 2011, their viewership has never reached those levels again, as cable subscriptions have declined significantly since. This was the beginning of the great social media emergence, and truthfully, TV in general was struggling. As a result, ESPN had to cut costs, and they did that by laying off 350 employees, who were mostly not on camera. Then the network did the same thing in 2017. This time, many were on-air personalities who would become familiar faces to viewers, but were cut as the network had to cut extra cost. Which brings us to the last number of years where ESPN has been losing its audience's respect more and more. Whether that's from delving into politics, prioritizing loud, controversial opinions over actual analysis, or covering only the biggest names, from the Lakers, Cowboys, LeBron, and Aaron Rodgers. ESPN simply isn't what it used to be. ESPN used to be the place where pundits would beg to work for so they could showcase their skills. Now, personalities can just start their own independent show and do better on their own without being controlled by the higher-ups. Which takes us to ESPN's competition that's been slowly catching up. Every major sport has their own dedicated sports network. Undisputed developed into a First Take clone. YouTube had emerged into a place where fans could watch highlights and independent creators. Which is probably why ESPN is failing, right? Actually, not at all. As cable subscribers decline, ESPN's digital viewership is growing, and their audience is actually bigger than their TV peak in 2011. But the way they're staying relevant is what so much fans hate. You see, before social media, whatever ESPN put on was what defined us sports fans. Now with Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and every teenager having access to the entire internet at their fingertips, kids become influenced by so many other things. So ESPN pretty much has to force themselves onto us. As a result, the network prioritizes personalities that can bring in the biggest crowd, no matter if it's positive or negative. And that's a big reason why Stephen A. Smith recently got a $100 million contract from ESPN, a deal that makes many believe that he's the most overpaid man in America. But the truth is, he earned it. Stephen A. Smith is an expert at sparking up a conversation. So well that he had a public feud with LeBron James. And although ESPN has some great shows like PTI, Sportscenter with Van Pelt, and Monday Night Football with the Manning brothers, the question is, will ESPN soon reinvent themselves or keep going down their current path?